Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And good morning again, CFA Society of Nigeria.
We've been working you very hard. Carla was here yesterday, and as Banji sort of alluded to, had an absolute nightmare of a journey to get here. And I can't tell you, as a seasoned traveler myself, how impressed I was with your energy level yesterday, having had virtually no sleep whatsoever. It was extraordinary. And thank you so much from CFA Institute for everything that you did yesterday.
Well, it was my honor. And again, I'm honored to be here. And I have to tell you, I took a lot of energy from the crowd yesterday. So if any of you walked out feeling like that, that's because I was pulling from you. I was pulling from you.
Tell us about your first impressions of Nigeria.
Oh, I'll tell you, it's been great. And Banji's right. He said to me on that phone call as I was getting all nervous, and I was really getting nervous because a friend of mine who's lived on the continent for 10 years was the one giving me all the horror stories. And so when I got nervous, and I have a 3-year-old, so you can imagine, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get back to my daughter. I got to get back to my daughter. And he was so good at laying all of my fears, and he said, I assure you, you are not going to feel that way when you leave. And I haven't been here 24 hours yet, and he was right. So thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. Your first trip to Nigeria, but you've been in Ghana before.
I've been in Ghana and South Africa, so first time to Nigeria. Yes.
Great. All right. Well, hopefully Banji and the team will show you a little bit more of Lagos before.
Yeah, we snuck out a little bit last night, Boku and I, and we saw a little bit, and I'm hoping to see a little bit more today.
Great. I'm sure you will. I just wanted to take another straw poll. I know Banji asked the question, but let me just do it again to level set. Hands up those who were here yesterday and heard Carla speak.
Okay.
Okay, all right. And those who weren't, by definition, just so we can get a visual.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so about 50-50, Carla.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll try not to go over too much of what we covered yesterday. And most of my questions got asked yesterday, so I'm flagging a little bit today, but we'll try and do our best. Second question for the audience: who wants to hear Carla sing today? There you go, Carla. So you've got to pick your moment on that.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it when I talk about the pearls later on today.
Okay,
how about that?
All right. Okay, so.
But thanks for the setup, Paul.
And
that wasn't in the price, Banji. What are you talking about? Come on.
And I've heard Carla sing. So if you're thinking of leaving before Carla speaks to us again later on today, don't. It's unmissable. And knowing Nigeria a little bit as I do, I'm sure that you'll all join in, and you'll have the best backing choir that you've ever had, I'm sure.
I like it.
Okay, so first question. Tell us a little bit about something that came out when I was asked yesterday. Was a little bit about your early life, and how did you get into finance?
Yes.
I think a lot of young women sort of look at you and think, boy, how do I become Carla Harris?
Sure.
Basically.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, when I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, here with my husband, Victor Franklin, and I didn't know anything about finance, nothing. But the summer after my sophomore year at Harvard, I got an internship called SEO, Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, and it still exists today. And that was the summer that frankly changed the trajectory of my life, because all of a sudden I saw this new industry that I knew nothing about that would give me an opportunity to use the undergraduate backing that I had in economics. And I am negatively motivated. That's something you should know about me. I am negatively motivated. So when you tell me I can't do something, I'm all over it like a bad smell. And everybody said there's not a lot of women in this industry. There's not a lot of people of color. And when I had that summer internship, I found that to be true. I was the only woman of color on the entire floor, let alone in the entire department that was working in a revenue role. I was only 19 years old, and I realized, wait a minute, all the things that I thought were found in the law, because I thought I was going to be a lawyer, were actually there in finance. I wanted to call the shots very early on at an early age. I wanted to have a lot of responsibility, and I wanted to make a lot of money. So I looked at that industry and I said, wow, I'm 19. I'm working on analysis that people are making hundreds of millions of dollars of decisions on, and I'm 19. Number two, I see it's the business people that call the shots, not the lawyers. The lawyers help you get it done within the context of the law. And oh, by the way, you can make a lot of money. So I said, I think I'm going to do this. And that's how I got into finance. So even though I was only a sophomore, I realized that if I did the right thing in my junior year and made good grades, that I would be competitive to get the job in my senior year. And then the rest was history.
You spoke a little bit about your mother yesterday, who was clearly, as most of us are, an extraordinary influence on you. But you must have had someone else in your life at that age, at 19, sort of who you admired, who you looked up to, that sort of encouraged you to get into the industry?
No, I will tell you, it disproportionately was still my parents who made me feel that I could do anything that I wanted to do. They never discouraged me or encouraged me one way or the other. They knew I was going to do well. They knew I was going to go to college, but they didn't encourage me to go to Harvard. It was like, you're going to go to college.
Right.
And it was really being around other people who were aspiring to go to Ivy League schools that really made me pay attention. And that's what really made me say, again, that negative aspiration. I was in honors classes in high school, and people were around me with, oh, have you gotten your application into University of Pennsylvania? Have you gotten your application into Harvard? Have you heard from Princeton? Have you heard from Yale? And I'm looking at all these people around me who did not look like me,
right,
who were aspiring to go to these schools. And when I went to talk to the guidance counselor in high school, I said, I'm thinking about applying to these Ivy League schools. And he said, no, don't apply. Don't apply. And I said, why not? He said, it's very, very competitive. You'll go to college. You'll get into a good school. Just apply to the Florida schools. That's all you need to do.
Right.
And I couldn't understand why he was telling me not to do that. And everybody else in my honors classes, they weren't talking about University of Florida. They weren't talking about FSU. They weren't talking about FAMU. They were all talking about Harvard, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania. So being the good little Catholic girl that I am, I did exactly what he told me to do. I applied to all of the Florida schools, but then I applied to all the ones I wanted to apply to. And I got in. So moral of the story is never let anybody else count you out. And for, thank you. And for Pete's sake, don't count yourself out.
Yeah.
And again, my parents didn't go one way or the other. They just knew I was really good in school academically in high school, so they knew I would go to a college. So they really weren't pushing one way or the other. And when I got into Harvard, and here's another moral of the story, when I got into Harvard, my mother said, oh my goodness, how are we going to pay for that? But by then, I had figured out that that was the place to go. And I said, well, Mama, I don't know how we're going to do it, but I'm going, right? And I worked not one, not two, but 3 jobs in undergrad and still graduated magna cum laude. So I tell kids, you know, don't ever say what you can't do at the end of the day. So that's one of the, and again, that's been a motivation throughout. So I didn't need anybody in my sophomore year to say, go for it, because after that summer internship, I had decided I wanted to go for it. And if I had made that decision after then, with his help, I knew I should just go do it. Put your foot on the gas. Don't ever look left, don't look right, don't doubt yourself. Don't let money be a reason that you don't go for something, especially academically. If people are offering you loans to go to school, my answer is, what better investment than you? Right? And we all get in debt for cars, for houses, yes, ladies, for shoes. We all get in debt for other things, if you think about it. Why not invest in yourself? So you're going to have a lot of undergraduate loans. So it may seem like a lot of money. And when I graduated from undergrad, I had 6 figures worth of debt, and that was 1984. So 6 figures back then was a lot of money. And I will tell you that in 2.5 years, I paid it off after I graduated. So again, don't let money be a deterrent for not going for that which is going to be a good investment in you that will allow you to get a big return on the other end of that endeavor.
Amazing. And I just want to sort of develop that theme of that inner strength that you must have had to sort of decide that this was what you wanted to do. Because as you said, you probably, let alone being a woman of color, but being a woman at all on Wall Street at that time was extraordinary. One of the messages that I try and talk to young women about is that, I don't know of a single CEO out there today, or CIO out there, who isn't, their sort of number one KPI is to get more women into the profession. Yeah. They don't know how to do it.
That's
perhaps
right.
we can talk a little bit about that. But it's the sort of women who need to hear that message are the ones that realize that by being in the minority, actually you can turn that into a positive. And talk a little, because you must have come across some incredible prejudice at times in Wall Street, and tell us some of your horror stories and how you came them, how you coped with them as well, and kept that smile going that you spoke about yesterday.
Well, I have to tell you, Paul, I think a lot of it is that I absolutely did not go looking for it. Right? And so I think that, frankly, I was blessed because a lot of what might have been thrown at me, I actually missed, right? Because I wasn't looking for it, so it went right over my head. So there were things, though, that I did notice. But let me just say this. It's so funny because being a woman of color from the South, and you all know the stories about the southern part of the United States, right? So I don't need to go through that. Being a black woman from the South, I would have thought that if I was going to have a challenge, it was because I was black, not because I was a woman.
Right.
But I will tell you that after I started in this business, my plumbing was a lot more of a problem than my tan, okay, at the end of the day. And so that was a shock to me because, again, growing up in the South, I never even saw the issues of prejudice or discrimination or lack, if you will, women versus men. Growing up in the South, you are focused on black versus white, not women versus men. So I didn't even see it coming. So once I started on the street and I started realizing that there were actually people that had perceptions that women couldn't do this and women couldn't do that, I was actually shocked and amused, frankly, because every woman that I had known, they wanted to do something, they just did it, and that was my attitude. So if I encountered somebody that was very, very clear that they had an issue with who I was, I looked at that as a personal challenge, right? Because I realized that all of us are a function of where we come from. All of us, we are a function of the lens that we look through. And so I would say to myself, perhaps they just haven't met anybody like me.
I'm sure of that.
So I'm going to make sure that their experience with me is such that it will create a halo for the next person that they deal with that look like me. And it doesn't matter whether or not that person is worthy of that halo, not my concern, but I want to leave such a great impression that they automatically assume that their next experience with someone who looks like me will be the same. And that's what I would do. So I'll tell you, and I call it the Diana Ross strategy of relationship management. I know I'm going to date myself when I say this, but Diana Ross had a hit back in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was, I'm gonna make you love me. Ooh, yes, I will. Yes, I will. So if I found somebody who was like that, I was like, I'm gonna make you love me. So there was this guy on my very first deal, and you have to understand, I had supposedly 3 strikes against me. I was young, I was black, and I was a woman. I was 24 years old, my very first M&A deal. I went out to work on the transaction, and my job was to sell this company. And there were 4 white men who were at the top of this company. So I didn't even get it at the time. It didn't matter what I looked like. They weren't going to be too happy with the investment banker coming, because if I was successful in selling this company, these guys were going to not have a job. Now, the good news is they had a nice pair of golden handcuffs, right. So if I was successful, they were going to get paid anyway. And I remember my very first time sitting down with the CEO. Boy, did he grill me. So, where'd you go to business school? Harvard. Where'd you go to undergrad? Harvard. And he was like, how'd you do? And I said, well, I graduated magna cum laude. I got a summa and a magna on my thesis, and it's in Harvard Archive sitting next to JFK. Any other questions? Right? And the guy was like, right? But I remember thinking to myself, would he have asked my colleagues all those questions, right? And then this was the real example of the Dine and Raw strategy. The COO was a guy who did not like me. The guy did not like me. Everything I went out there to tell them to do, you should put this in the data room, you should do that in the data room, he would always reject it, no matter what. And I said, that's the guy. That's my guy. I'm going to get close to this guy. And every time I came, he made it difficult. But every time I came, I made sure I said something to him. And I would get in his personal space, and he would back up a little bit, and I would just make sure every time. So he had a wife who was pregnant, and she was due in October, and my birthday is October 28th. So one of the things that I did every time I went out there is I said to him, she's going to have that baby on my birthday. She's going to have that baby on my birthday. And the guy would be like, He would just, but I kept working on him. Well, she had the baby on my birthday. Now, what do y'all think he named her? I'm gonna make you love me. Ooh, yes, I did. Yep.
That's a wonderful story. It sort of throws up a couple of threads, one of which you mentioned yesterday, intentionality.
Yeah.
All of your stories seem to me to speak very powerfully to that.
Yes.
The thoughtfulness with which you've pursued every stage of your career and all these episodes within it. Mm-hmm. For those who didn't have the benefit of hearing you talk about that yesterday, I think that's a very, very important message.
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up, Paul, because one of the things, if there's no other message that I leave you with on my visit here, is to understand your own power. And it's so easy for us to get into a situation, especially when it's coming at you hard and fast. It's so easy to feel like things are happening to you, and you're wondering why they're happening to you. But the thing I want you to remember is the power that we have to turn around any situation. And for sure, if you call yourself a person of faith, then you have to understand that you always have power on your side. So even when it feels like it's coming at you, that's the time for you to stop and say, okay, what message is the universe, God, Allah, whatever you want to call it, what message are you trying to bring me right now? Because clearly you want to get my attention. You got my attention because it's hard and it's heavy. So what am I supposed to learn out of the situation? And when you start to think like that, then you start to realize the power that you have. It's your decision to stop. It's your decision to stop and think about what's happening to you. It's your decision to figure out what you're learning at that situation. At that point in that situation. It's your decision to say, okay, how do I take this learning and apply it? I have two choices. I can sit down and let the weight of whatever it is weigh me down, or I can make a decision to put one foot in front of the other one more time and see what's going to happen, right? And it's that kind of thought process that I developed. I didn't have it when I came to the street, but it's that kind of process that I developed as I matured in my spiritual walk that made me realize that I had the power to actually own a situation, no matter how bad it might feel at that time, no matter how much I may feel like I'm not in control. I can make the decision to just sit back and relax and say, okay, bring it on. Whatever's going to happen, hit me with it. Hit me today, right? But that's, again, my call. And I think you feel more empowered when you have that kind of intentionality around how you're going to deal in that moment with that situation than if you just abdicate that power. And I had to be intentional, frankly, about how I planned my career because I did not have a playbook. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote my first book, Expect to Win, because I realized that many of us, especially in the cultures where we come from as people of color, we're taught to bring excellence to the table all the time, and we're taught to put our heads down, and we're taught to work really hard. But I figured out in being smart, in working hard, in putting my head down, that wasn't enough, that I still was not propelling the way that I thought I should be propelling. And that's when I realized the power of relationships in all of these businesses that are high-powered, that are very intense, very dynamic, very competitive, and frankly, very highly compensated. The more compensated you are, or the higher the compensation, the more there's a dependency on relationships. Mm-hmm. It is not objective. It is not the smartest man wins. It's about whose boy or whose girl you are at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, that's a great message, Carla. I mean, I think that's so important. And, you know, so much of life we waste worrying about other people's actions and things, but the only thing that we can truly control is ourselves.
Yes,
so
sir.
I think
that's correct.
That's a tremendous message to convey. A couple of other thoughts on some of the things that you've been saying. Women's responsibilities to women in terms of this gender battle. It often confuses me. I mean, as a man, you always assume that 100% of all women are going to be for women. But as I'm sure you know better than I do, that isn't the case.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that and what you feel as a successful woman, your responsibilities are to everybody else.
I do feel strongly that my responsibility to other women is to be helpful to them in any way that I can. I think it was Margaret Thatcher who said that there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
Yes, it was,
and frankly, that's not Carla Harris, that's Margaret Thatcher. Look it up. But you know, I have to say that I agree wholeheartedly with her because, you know, again, none of us get to where we are on our own. And you have to recognize that you are standing on somebody else's shoulders.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as the only woman in the room, if you have an opportunity to speak about another woman, and you say to yourself, well, why are they looking to me to speak? You know, just because I'm a woman doesn't mean that I have, you know, a point of view. If you have a point of view about another woman, don't abdicate that because of what you think other people are thinking. Sometimes, frankly, the boys are looking to you to see what you feel about another woman. Take that opportunity and support another woman. You may be in a position of power today, but trust me, you're not always going to be in a position of power. And that power that you have actually empowered somebody else with, or those seeds that you have planted for somebody else, will actually come back to benefit you. I am 31 years into my career right now, but I am highly confident that should I choose to walk away from what I'm doing right now, that there are several places, several doors that I could knock on to get a job by those people that I was empowering 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, who are now in positions of power. At the end of the day, they'll find me a seat because they remembered when they were trying to get there, I was the woman who was helping them as a young professional coming into the door. Now, as a more seasoned, not old, as a more seasoned professional, I'm sure that they would be willing to help me, and I've seen it over and over again. So if not for any other reason, but, you know, really focusing on yourself, then for that reason you should help other women. Now, I do it because I can, not because I'm looking for anything else. And I also get the joke, Paul. If you want to grow your power, give it away.
Yeah.
Give it away. That's the way to do it.
Pay it forward.
Pay it forward. But we as women have to help each other. We cannot let the next generation of women leaders recreate the wheel. If the next generation is doing what we did, or having to go through everything that we went through, or having to learn the same lessons that we learned, then we are holding us back. Because it takes time to learn these lessons. Why not give you my entire playbook so you can run faster and get much further down the road by the time you hit your first wall? We're all going to hit a wall, but I would hope you would be miles ahead of when I hit my wall. But yet I still find women who are my generation who are saying they want it like it was yesterday. You know, they just want to be a vice president right away. You know, they act like they don't have to pay their dues. And I'm like, get over it. Yeah. They should not have to wait as long as we waited in order to get to the same spot. Yeah. Right?
100% correct. Yep.
And I understand that maybe you feel that nobody helped you, right? Well, again, I say get over it. We have the power to help the next generation of women, and we absolutely have to do that. And I do feel it's my responsibility to do it.
Fabulous. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the industry as well, Carla. I thought, you know, let's think a little bit about that. We've just published this gender guide, diversity guide for companies. When you look at the way that our industry is structured, the finance industry in general, what's the advice that you would give to a male CEO who's struggling with this issue of how does he get more young women into the profession, and how does he retain them in the profession as well? What are the sorts of the big barriers that you see in that?
The three things that I would tell him is, number one, invest in educating women early about this industry. And you actually said it in your remarks, Paul. I think one of the reasons that there aren't more women in finance and there aren't more women in investment management is that we don't hear about it until it's too late. As I shared with you, and I just shared with you all, my first exposure to finance was the sophomore year that I was in college. I was exposed to was traditional investment banking. So I learned about corporate finance, corporate finance, public finance, mergers and acquisitions, sales and trading. I didn't hear anything about investment management. I didn't hear anything about wealth management. I didn't hear anything about sell-side research. But those were the areas I was exposed to. I figured out which one of them I liked, and that's what I went for. Who's to say that if I'd heard about investment management when I was a sophomore in college, that I would not have gone that route? I certainly didn't really learn about research until I started on Wall Street, and when I realized what great research analysts made and what kind of power they had in the market, I was very attracted to that. But at that point, I was already in a track that I liked anyway, which is why I stayed in that particular area. So the earlier that you expose very smart women to investment management, I think the higher the probability that that might be a lane that they choose. So that's the first thing I would tell that CEO. The second thing I would tell that CEO is try to make sure that he can get some women in his organization right now. Because the millennial generation and the Z generation, they really need to see it in order to believe that it's going to be something that would be reasonable to them. As boomers, we were the first in many situations, but that didn't bother us because you frankly had no choice. Either you were going to be the first or you weren't going to do it at all. So it wasn't a deterrent. But I'm finding the time that I spend with millennials and the time that I spend with Zers, the first thing they'll say was, I don't see anybody that looks like me. I don't know if I want to do that because nobody else is doing it. So it's real evidence for them, and it's a real motivator and an inspiration to see someone who looks like them in that spot. They now say, okay, I could do that. So that's the second thing I would tell them. Laterally hire at the senior levels just so you get them in the door now. The third thing you need to do is to really monitor their success. And the mistake that most corporations make today across all industries is they'll bring somebody in laterally, but they just drop them in.
Yeah.
And assume that because you've had a great track record heretofore, you're going to be successful in that environment. But as you heard me say yesterday, the body will naturally reject that which is foreign. So it doesn't matter if the person can do the job. You drop them into your culture. If you don't over-invest in their success, they will never ever accomplish what they did in their last organization and give to you that which you have paid for to bring them over.
Great.
Yep.
Fabulous advice. Obviously you've had an amazing academic career as well as a business career, and we're not all as gifted as you are.
I would beg to differ.
Well, tell us about that, because I think that's, I was talking to a couple of the guests yesterday, women guests yesterday, and the thought that struck me was a lot of people are quite shy. A lot of people aren't very intentional. A lot of people do have self-confidence issues. How do you overcome those sorts of things? What's the advice for the average person?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I think we're all gifted. I think, and we're all exceptional. That's the thing. And that's one of the reasons that I speak as much as I do, and that's one of the reasons that you hear me say things like own your power and that fear has no place in your success equation, because I think we create a narrative in our own minds, especially when we run into trouble for the first time. Or you unconsciously give your power away by letting somebody else get in your head around what you can or you cannot do. And sometimes the persons that are getting in our head are our own family. Yeah. And we don't even see it, all right? Because we love them and we would never think that they would be trying to make us feel less than. But in fact, what people do unconsciously is that they push their own insecurities and worries on you. Oh, they're not going to let you do that. Oh, it's hard out there for a woman. Oh, you're not going to find a partner if you are too outstanding. And all those things that, people around us who love us, who think they're helping us by warning us, are actually transferring their own insecurities. And before you know it, you have internalized that, and you feel some kind of way going against that person that you love, especially, like I said, if it happens to be your parents or some other loved one around you. But at some point, especially when you become an adult, you have to spend some time with yourself and actually think about what you want and what you can do, and give that person a pass that might be trying to protect you. Give them a pass, right, and say, well, I understand they're coming from their responsibility, from their perspective, but at the end of the day, you know, all parents want you to be successful. They are trying to protect you. Put it in that category and go forward on your own. And then spend some time with yourself, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses and what you're really good at, and then testing that. So that's kind of how you get over it, is first saying, no, I am powerful, I am unique, I have a set of gifts that other people don't have. Don't spend time actually comparing yourself to other people. Celebrate what it is that you have. And if you don't know what it is, if you don't feel special, you sit there with yourself until you figure it out, right? I'm a good friend. I'm a great listener. You know, I can speak very well. I have a good analytical mind. I'm a great problem solver. I'm very creative. I can sew like nobody else can sew. You know, whatever it is, find something that is easy for you. And that thing that's easy, that you don't really have to work at, that might be the core of your unique gift. And figure out ways to continue to do that, right? I have figured out over the last few years that I've been speaking more often, I may be a great banker, but I'm a really good speaker, right? And I have figured that out. I'm like, Carla, that's your thing. You might be empowered and gifted to do all these other things, but that's your thing. So you ought to spend more time doing that thing. And now that I've had that realization, I'm spending more time doing that. Love banking, good at banking, glad I've been recognized at it, no question. You know, but that thing over there, that's easy. And the thing that's easy, that is at the core, if not the real gift that you have. So spend more time exploiting that at the end of the day. And don't let anybody take your power away. And people come to take your power unconsciously when they're starting to say, oh, you can't do that. Or, you know, that's really going to be hard. You know, if it's a person you love, say, oh, girl, thank you very much for your perspective. And just go on the other way and go for it.
Great message. Thank you. Banji, have we put some microphones in the audience? I thought I'm sure there are some questions. Come on.
No, it's on the app. He said it's coming on the app.
No, well, the app, I think the app is kind of, we're going old school. Hands up.
Okay.
Anyone want to
There's
ask?
one over there, Paul.
Where?
Right there.
Over here. That gentleman.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, earlier you spoke about self-confidence, about people being shy with regards to networking and meeting other people. But I think in Nigeria it's more of a culture thing, that you can't access people, or when you go to talk to them, they feel you are invading their personal space and other things. So especially like with a society like this, where you get to meet people, network, you want advice from them, but it's really difficult. So what are we going to do to change that, to help other people? Because not everyone has an idea of where they're going to. So I think being more accessible is more of the issue rather than being shy or self-confidence.
Yes. So I would say that that's something that the society can actually spend more time doing. Since your society is so focused on making sure they give you tools, then, you know, I would say Boku or Banji, one of the things you can do is to make sure that people get skills and tools around networking. Yep. Because for all of us, if we've never done it, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable for me to do it too. It's not my nature. As much of an extrovert as I appear to be, I would come into a conference like this and could easily leave a conference like this never meeting one person and be perfectly happy with all the content that I absorbed. But I realized that I was missing more than 50% of the value by not connecting with people. So I, again, began to practice the same way that I would do anything else. I'd go to somebody and say, hey, how are you? Why are you here at the conference? Then I would learn that, you know, he's the head of the society, blah, blah, blah. But I would just practice. And because you heard me say yesterday, I'm an executor, I would put that on my list. So when I first started going to conferences like this and I realized that 50% of the value was networking, sir, I would say, okay, Carla, you can't come out of that conference without 10 business cards. Your job is to get 10 business cards. And in the beginning, because I was just I'd go up to somebody and say, hey, how are you? May I have your card? And, right? And I would have my card ready. I had no other conversation for them. But it was the practice of approaching people that I was actually working on. And again, don't be deterred if someone, you know, kind of gives you a funny look. You just go on to the next person and keep working on it until you feel comfortable refining your approach. But that's how you need to do it. And I hear what you're saying, sir, about it's not in your culture and it feels like you're invading their personal space. But unless the person, you know, says, get away, you are invading my space, don't assume that that's what they're thinking. And most speakers will actually accommodate you unless, you know, they really can't because there's 100 people around them. But most people will be very kind. One of the things that I try to do when someone approaches me is I try to be very responsive and I try to look at them because I know how much courage it takes to actually go up to somebody and say, hey, may I have a picture? Or, hey, can I shake your hand? Or, hey, that was a really good speech. I know it takes a lot to do that. So I at least want to honor the fact that you tried, right? Even if I can't spend a lot of time with you. Not every speaker will do that, but I will tell you 9 out of 10, I think will. So don't create the narrative in your head that you can't approach them. I would say practice.
I think you might find that you get asked for a few pictures
I
sometimes.
I did. I
think there may be a few more. Yes, lady here.
So my question is about, as you've been growing your career, right, something I've seen that women struggle with at times is, you know, you're good at what you do, you have the expertise, but when you're given the opportunity, how do you ask for, let's say you want to ask for, look, I want to do this. I think I've done this really well. I want to be given that executive opportunity. I feel like this is something women struggle with at times. Guys, it's very easy to talk about their accomplishments and just ask. But for women, it's at times a struggle.
Yes, and part of it's a struggle, I think, because you are already anticipating how that person is going to answer you, or you are anticipating how they might react. And I say stop that thinking right there, whatever you're thinking about, because again, you're now creating this whole narrative in your own mind. You should focus when you're practicing on how do I want to say this, and why would it be good for them to tell me yes, right? So when you go to see them, think about the words you use and think about how you deliver it. Because as your mother told you, it's not always what you say, it's how you say it. So practice a few times before you actually say it, right? So I'm going to give you a quick example. One of my colleagues, male colleagues, said to me one day, I go in every year and tell them what I want to get paid. And I thought, oh my gosh, what language do you use? Like, how do you do that? And he said, I just go in and tell them every year what I want to get paid. And I could not imagine how I could fix my mouth to tell these guys what I wanted to get paid. But I'll tell you what made me move. I kept thinking to myself, Carla, you know, suppose, okay, I'll give you an example. Investment bankers get paid in a range. And let's just say hypothetically, the range for my class that year was $150,000 to $300,000, okay? And I kept saying to myself, Carla, suppose you don't say anything and you get paid $150,000. But suppose you say something and you get paid $300,000. Is your fear worth $150,000? Uh-huh. And I thought to myself exactly what you guys are thinking, right? And so I started practicing. I want to get paid. I want to get paid. I want to get paid. I kept practicing until I found.
I hated employees like you.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you entertain the discussion, don't you?
I pay them. Yeah,
right.
I just
That's
get them out of the
right.
room.
Okay. So I got it the way I thought it would work. So I went to see my boss and I said, listen, I need to talk to you because this is something that's really important to me. I've had a really terrific year. Listen to my script. This is the one that you deliver. I've had a really terrific year, and I would like that to be recognized at the highest levels of the firm. And I want you to know that it's important for me to get paid this year. Now, my understanding is the way that you all calculate pay is first how the firm does, second how your department does, and third how you do. I said, but I can't speak to the other two, but my year has been really great, and it's important to me that that's recognized. Now, I know you can't tell me anything right now, but I just wanted to make sure you know, whoop, and I got out of there really fast. Right. Now, I want to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, did I get paid? Absolutely. And let me tell you this. Every year that I have failed to have that conversation, I can see it on the page. You can't just assume that it stands in perpetuity. You have to exercise your voice every time. It's important for me to get paid. It's important for me to get paid. And whatever you want me to do, you tell me, because I want to get paid. If that's something that's important for you. But you practice it until you feel comfortable with the delivery. You make sure that you have an argument as to why it's good for the organization for you to do whatever it is you want to do, and then you go in and you execute. But remember, the only person that has responsibility for your career is you. With all due respect to my HR colleagues in the room, not their job to make sure that you get paid, promoted, or that you get access to certain opportunities. It is your responsibility to ask. Exercise your voice. Practice until it feels good, and then deliver.
Final question, Carla. I've been asked to take one off the app, so I'm gonna ask you a real fastball. This is a zinger.
Okay.
Is it advisable to forego crossing professional boundaries into personal territories with one's manager, male or female? That sounds like a very personal question to
Yes.
me.
Yeah, and I would say never cross your personal boundaries. And if somebody crosses your boundary, you should stop right there and call them on it. Right? But don't let that happen, because you open yourself up to other transgressions, and more importantly, you will be angry at yourself. So it's not about what they do, it's about the disappointment you'll have in yourself because you didn't say something, you didn't exercise your rights and your voice. And if you stop people where they are, I'll tell you, they won't do it again in most cases, right? And it's all about a bully. Right, because as people like to say all the time, and they used to tell me when I first came to New York, because New York was more dangerous than it is today, but they would say, never walk around the streets looking up at the big buildings, right, because then you look like a tourist, and if people think you're going to be an easy mark, they come for you, right? And so I would walk around New York City with this look like, you're going to have a bad day if you even think about it, right? And that's the same thing with the bully at work. You got to say, you don't want to do that. So if anybody made statements that kind of even remotely crossed the line, you know, I would say things like, you better watch yourself. You get across that line, you don't want to be there. Trust me, you don't want to be across that line, right? And that would push people off, but don't do it. Don't cross your personal line. But more importantly, whoever asked that question is, know where your personal line is. Because a lot of us go into situations not having defined what my line is, right? And then all of a sudden you get into that uncomfortable space. But know where your line is so that you can hold it when somebody gets close to it.
Fabulous.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a wrap.
Thank you, Paul.
We've got a wrap, but Carla's back after the coffee break. That was a wonderful session. I learned a huge amount. I'm sure everyone in the audience learned a huge amount too. So put it together for Carla. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Oh, sure. Okay.